All right, so we're going to do some more practice problems with some advanced formulas in Excel. And we've got this document that we can download from our class files called Lesson 8.2 and 8.3 Intro. And so I've got this file opened up in Excel. I'm going to go through some of the functions that we can use in this unit. Now, first we're going to start off with what's called a VLOOKUP. That is a vertical lookup formula. What we're going to use it for in this case is we've got a grading scale or grading chart over here, and we do need to name this, so we're going to give that range a name. We don't need the headings in there, of course, so we're going to highlight the range, and we're going to just name it grade scale here for our purposes. It's just a little bit easier than having to enter a range in the formula. So what we want it to do is we want it to look at this and determine what letter grade each of these students has. So we're going to use the VLOOKUP to do that. That means it looks up the value in the first column of the range. So I'm going to come in here. You can, if you know what you're looking for, you can type it in. So I'll type in VLOOKUP here, and it should look for it, and then I can choose it. There we go. And then here are our function arguments for a VLOOKUP field. First up, it wants to know where is the value we're looking up. In this case, we're looking at Bob's grade. So we are looking up the value in F5, in his case, the 54. Then it wants to know the table array. So this would be the range where this table is. In our case, our range is this area here, which we've already named grade scale, or that was the goal, to name it something. Notice that you will see all of those numbers lit up. There's the 0, the F, the 60, the D, and so forth. So it's going to look up F5, it's going to look up the 54 in the grade scale. It's going to always look it up in column 1. Then it wants to know where do you want it to get the answer from? And this is going to be a number referring to which column in that range. So these letters are in column 2 of this range. Now it wouldn't matter if this is all the way across the page over here. These two columns are next to each other, and this is the right side second column. So this is going to be 2. It tells you here as a preview that's looking up M, and it's finding F. Now this bottom one is actually one of those things that we can omit. Notice it says true is omitted. Now this is really important in this type of a table, because what it does is it's going to look it up, and notice that 54 is not even in this table, right? 60 is, 0 is, but 54 is not. But I've listed them in such a way that we go high to low, or low to high here, 0 to 90. And so therefore, if this says true here, or if we leave it blank, we omit it, it doesn't have to be an exact match. So it's going to go with the closest match that doesn't go over. In this case, it's looking at the 0 because the 54 doesn't hit the 60. If I was to type in false in here, which we wouldn't want to do on this case, we're going to have a problem. I'm just going to go ahead and click it. Notice that it says NA because there is no 54 over here. And so when you have false in here, you're looking for an exact match. Well, we're not. We just want an approximate match. That's the technical word, the approximate match. So I'm going to hit OK and leave that blank this time, and then we get our F. And then when we drag down, we get the rest of these, F, A, C, C, and B. And so that would be the correct one there. All right. Next, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the HLOOKUP. HLOOKUP is identical to VLOOKUP, except instead of our chart being columns, it is horizontal rows. Okay, so that should be pretty good. Now, in this case, we do not want approximate matches because these were ranges, like 0 to 59 is an F, but here, Missouri, that's an absolute. We don't want it to be Mississippi and that's close enough, right? That wouldn't be good. So in the case here, what we're going to do is an HLOOKUP that's going to look up the value on the first row of our table and do something with the value on the second row. Because here we have funds available and we want to know what the grant funds available are going to be for that specific person in that state. Okay, so we've got kind of some different stuff going on here. Let's go ahead and pull up the HLOOKUP. Again, we can go search for it. go. And then we have kind of the same story. So we have our lookup value here. That's going to be, what are we looking up? In this case, we are going to look up the state for Bob. That is H16. We're going to look it up in our table. Now, I didn't make this one a table, but I wouldn't include state and grant rate in this table. I would just include this area. So you could have a range in here, or if you've named this ahead of time, you would use that defined name in your formula. And you can do it either way. All right, it's always going to match for the top column, or top row, and in the case of the VLOOKUP, the first column. And so we want to return the number in the bottom, right? So that's going to be row 2 in our selection of things, right? All right, so we've got that. Now, here is where we want a exact match. We want it to match only Missouri. So we are going to put false because we want an exact match. All right, so when we hit OK here, that returns kind of an odd number for what we're looking at. It just gives us this 30%. It's basically just giving us that number, and it's putting it into a decimal point. Well, that's because I've given you some instructions here that say to find out the grant funds available, we're going to take the funds available and multiply it times that rate. So we're not done with doing the math on this part. So we're going to come up to our formula, and we're going to take the answer of that, and we're going to multiply that answer by those funds available, which is I-16 in this case. So we've got to do the math. If they're only going to get 30 cents, that's not going to make anybody happy, right? So we're going to take 30% of the available funds gives us the grant funds available. When I hit enter, then we get $1,500 because I've already formatted this range in accounting format. When we pull down, you should then see the remaining ones. Now, in the case here, because I didn't use a range that was named, I want you to see what's happening, okay? Notice that when I copy this down, okay, it's updating to the next row, so it's looking up Missouri, but it also changed this range and moved it down one. I'm going to hit escape and click on the next one. You can see what it does here. Aha, see, every single row is moving down on that table. So that's the benefit of naming the range first, because then it absolutely points to these cells. So you're probably thinking, well, what do I do about that now? Well, obviously we're going to have to edit the formula. We could do one of two things. We can make this table array here, an absolute function. We can certainly do that. That's a pretty common thing actually with these functions as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to put dollar signs around, and dollar signs just mean absolute value, around every single row and column in that little table range. So if I do that, now I'm getting an absolute value, meaning when I copy it down, anything with dollar signs stays the same. It won't update, it won't move down. So I'm going to click on here and do that. And then by and large, now we have the correct answers. And so that's what you should end up with. Now, like I said, you can either do the absolute value, which is good to understand, or you could have come in here and named this ahead of time. Let's say I'm going to name it state, just because that's the easy name to remember. Then I could have done this function differently, and instead of having that, oh yeah, I can't edit the function anymore because I added math onto the end of it. So I'll have to do this the old-fashioned way. So I'll double-click here. And then in place of that table array, I can now just put the name of that table. Notice that turns red, so it is still looking at that state table. And then again, I can copy those down. I don't know why I keep right-clicking here. The answers are all identical, and now it's using state instead of that absolute range. But state is an absolute range, and that's why we have gotten in this chapter to defining names for ranges, because then you don't have to worry about that messing up. Okay, so this is kind of the first place where you should pause this video and you should go try to do this on your own in the exercise. And then come back and join me for the next part. All right, so the next one here is a nested if function. And the nested if function is, we've nested before other functions in an if, but this is an if within an if. So this gets a little bit complicated. With the if function here, what we're going to do is we're going to say there's multiple things that can happen. So this guy's 15. It says here, if you are below 15, you're too young for a license. So you can't even have a license. Okay. If you're between 16 and 45, you're going to pay a $30 fee to have a license. And if you're 46 and older, so if you're basically anything other than these things, you're going to have a $100 fee. So we do kind of have a value if false here. So if it's none of these, it's this. But we kind of have two different kinds of true values. And this is done a little bit differently than how we've done this in the past because we're using an embedded if. So I'm going to come in here and choose my if function. And then you have your logical test. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. We have to evaluate this, and we've got to put in our if function. So the first thing is we have our first if function. We have a logical test here. So we're looking at this. We're looking at the first number, and we're determining if it's less than 16 because that's the first thing. If it's below 16, you're just too young for a license. So the value if true is too young, right? So far, that part should make sense to you because we've done things like this before. The problem is the value if false, we can't just go with one thing. We've got more. So in this case, we're going to have another if function as our value if false. So we have too young, but if it's false, we're going to fall back to another if function. We're going to say if, and then we're going to put that in again, that B29. And we're going to give the other side of this. So we're going to say the far side. So we already did this side. Now we're going to hit this side. So if it's false, if B29 is less than or equal to 45, okay, so less than or equal to 45, that's going to cover the middle range. Then what we're going to have is a $30 fee. So we'd put in 30. But if that doesn't happen, then our false is you're going to pay a $100 fee. So like all other options are going to be that $100 fee. Okay, so just let's talk through it one more time. So our logical test, we look at the age and we determine if it meets the first criteria. And it is easiest on these to start with the lowest number and work your way up, or start with your highest number and work your way down. But you've got to kind of put them in order as you're using them. So if B29 is less than 16 here, you're too young. Otherwise, we have another if function to determine on false. So looking at it, if B29 is less than or equal to 45, that hits our middle range, then we have a $30 fee. And if it's not that, then they're older than that, and that's going to be a $100 fee. And that should take care of that one. We'll fill that down. And sure enough, there we go. We've got one person who's too young. We have two $30 fees, a $100 fee, and another $30 fee. All right, that one's a little bit complicated. I always have to really think hard on these nested if functions. So this will conclude this video. So you'll want to stop this video, take a look at that on this part, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you the next section coming up next.